All right, so thank you everybody for joining us. Quick note before I get going, just to remind everybody you should have gotten a pop-up at the beginning of your meeting, but this meeting is being recorded and it will be shared to all the registrants afterwards. So if you can't attend the meeting, it'll be shared afterwards, or if ever you want to reconsult it, you'll be able to do so, as well as the slides. So you'll have something to, if you wanted any additional material outside of the guidelines to help you during your review. So that having been said, I'd like to start by saying a hello, thank you, and welcome for joining us here at our expert committee briefing for the 2025 Innovation Fund. Our goal here is to give you an overview of the fund and hopefully more specifically discuss your role as an expert reviewer in this merit review process for this competition. So questions are absolutely welcome throughout the presentation. To keep the flow going, we've decided to go with a Q&A. So you can put any questions you may have in the Q&A portion of the Teams function. My colleagues will be there standing by to answer any questions you may have. And then at the end, whatever time is left, we'll be able to do kind of a live Q&A where you'll be able to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask any questions verbally if you'd like. I will be looking across different screens as I have my notes in the PowerPoint, so apologies if I'm not looking directly straight. And yeah, so let's get going, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all the questions you have, and hopefully this will be informative and help make the review process as standardized and clear as possible. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the CFI, our mandate here is to increase the capability of Canada's universities, colleges, research hospitals, and nonprofit research organizations to carry out high-quality research by investing specifically in research infrastructure. So we don't provide funding for consumables and things like that, specifically infrastructure. Importantly, this applies across all disciplines of research, both from humanities to the STEMs, and it really spans from fundamental research all the way to applied clinical research. So you'll note here that in our mandate, we have a focus on institutions. So technically speaking, the institutions are our applicants, and we fund infrastructure at these institutions to build up Canada's research capacity as a whole. So slightly different than some other funding models you might see. So today's agenda, we're going to go over the budget and objectives of the fund, the timeline, the rating scale, the streams, which is something new in the 2025 version of this competition, the assessment criteria, which is what you guys will be using to basically go through these proposals. We'll do a quick overview of what a proposal might look like so you have an idea of what you're getting into and how you can maybe organize your review. And then what is your role as an expert committee member, and how are we expecting a meeting to go to be done so that you know what to expect on the day of. So first, we'll start with the budget and the objectives. So our funding model here at the CFI is that we fund up to 40% of a project's eligible infrastructure costs. The remainder is usually made up by provincial governments, other public and private nonprofit organizations that give either cash or in kind or things like that. Most provinces have a parallel review process where they also will provide up to 40% of a project's costs. So the CFI and provincial funding models are usually the majority of the funding in these proposals, and then the rest is made up either by institutional contributions, private vendors, etc. And in addition to whatever funding a proposal might receive if they are successful in the competition, they'll also receive some additional funding for some operation and maintenance supports. So through what we call our Infrastructure Operating Fund, or commonly IOF, institutions receive an automatic allocation that's equal to 30% of the amount that was awarded, the CFI amount that was awarded to each project. So this can help the institutions sustainably manage and maintain their infrastructure over time. So this funding really is used for, as the name might suggest, operating and maintaining the infrastructure over a long period of time. So for example, if a proposal was awarded $1 million in infrastructure funding from the CFI, they would also receive an additional automatic $300,000 through the IOF to help support the operation and maintenance of the infrastructure. So this is not an element of the proposal that you need to review. It's an automatic addition to the award, but it's just something we like to make you aware of, because you will often see that come up in the budget where they say the institutions will provide X amount for the maintenance, and oftentimes that's equivalent to what they might receive as the IOF funding. So the competition here, so this year, or this iteration of the competition, we have $425 million in capital, plus $127.5 million in the IOF that we just discussed. And hopefully the goal here is to fund projects that will meet the 3 objectives of the fund, which are to enable internationally competitive research or technology development through the equitable participation of expert team members. First objective. Second objective is to enhance the capacity of institutions to conduct the research or technology development program over the useful life of the infrastructure. And then finally, of course, is to generate benefits for Canadians. So we'll get into this a little bit later, but you'll notice that these broader objectives are connected to the assessment criteria that you as an expert reviewer will be using to assess the proposals. So to give you a bit of an overview of what we've received in terms of requests or submitted proposals as part of this competition, apologies. So we've received 334 proposals. The total CFI requests of those proposals is 1.4 billion. So as you might have noticed, we are oversubscribed by about 3 times, which means we can expect approximately a 30% success rate, which was engineered that way, the way with our proposal, our call for proposals was built with the kind of envelopes given to institutions. We have about 70 institutions who have, or not about 70 institutions who have submitted proposals. 97 of them come from the West and the Territories, 118 from Ontario, 101 from Quebec, and 18 from the Atlantic region. So that's kind of the spread of proposals. And I like to iterate, especially to the reviewers here, that there is an expected 30% funding rate, which means that it's okay that some proposals in your review fall maybe a little lower on the rating scale. We need to have that distribution. We'll talk about later about the importance of using the entire rating scale. And this is why it helps us, it helps the next level of review after this, which we'll also get into, make decisions if you don't give everything, an excellent rating. So next we'll go into the timeline here. So the proposal submission was due February 4th, so that has passed. We've since done our administrative review, so we've gone through the proposals to make sure that everything they're requesting is eligible, make sure that all the elements that we requested they submitted is present, all that stuff. Now we're currently in the process of getting ready for the expert committee review. This part of the review process, what happens is small groups of proposals, anywhere from 1 to, I think our largest one is 9. Small groups of proposals from same area of research are grouped together. Each proposal is evaluated on its own merit, and the proposals are the only pieces of information on which this assessment can be done. So you'll be looking at a proposal, you'll be looking at a proposal by itself. We do like to put proposals together as a group just to help benchmark, to help get an understanding of what's being submitted, but in itself, each proposal, you're not asked to rank proposals within your committee. You're really assessing each proposal on its own merit. The expert committee report, which is the output of the discussions and deliberations you'll be having at your meetings, will focus on the strengths and weaknesses that are identified as part of the meeting and how they're related to the 5 assessment criteria. So we'll get to the assessment criteria a little bit later, but the goal will really be to identify the strengths, the weaknesses that are in the proposal that are related to those 5 assessment criteria, and those will be summarized in a consensus report. And this consensus report is the basis for the next level of review, which is the Multidisciplinary Assessment Committee, or the MAC as we like to call it. So here we review proposals that meet what we call the minimum threshold. More on this a little bit later. And as the name might suggest here, multidisciplinary, this committee reviews proposals from a variety of disciplines. So the committee that makes up the individuals that make up these review committees will be varied in their experience and expertise, as well as the proposal. So here we're not looking at the scientific specifications, which is the job of what's happening here. It's a little bit more broad. So the Multidisciplinary Assessment Committee is responsible for identifying the proposals that best meet the competition objectives. So you guys will be working with the assessment criteria. Here the MAC will be working with the competition objectives, and they will provide a funding recommendation. So the MAC will provide a funding recommendation and funding amount for each proposal at the next stage of review. The next stage of the review is what we call the SMAC, or the Special Multidisciplinary Assessment Committee. And this committee makes funding recommendations for proposals that most effectively support the CFI's mandate, meet the objectives of the competition, and represent the most effective portfolio of investments for Canada. And then, of course, at the end here, we have the CFI Board of Directors, which makes the final funding decisions. Important to note for us here, excellence is the main driver throughout all stages of the review, and why it's first step, it's very important to get your feedback on the scientific and technical excellence of these proposals. That was the timeline. I guess I should have spoken, maybe I should go back and speak a little bit about the actual timing of all of this, since I didn't actually talk about the time. So the expert committee reviews are expected to last essentially until from March to early July. And then in between that time, we'll be writing the reports, sending them to the MAC members, they'll be reviewing them. And our MAC committees are expected to happen sometime in September. And then the next level review, the SMAC in October, and then finally funding decisions in November. As for when those will be publicly available, it does depend on the government announcements. But in theory, sometime after November 2025, the funding decisions should be released for this competition. So the rating scale. So here you'll notice at the top we have our rating scale, and then at the bottom here we have a table that kind of hopefully helps to interpret this rating scale. And these here represent the overall score you'll be providing for each individual assessment criterion we'll be looking at. So we hope that the scale is fairly straightforward. A 4 here kind of represents your satisfactory, meets everything that we need it to meet. And then it goes down from there, from minor weaknesses to kind of major weaknesses to really bad. You don't see ones that often, but the information provided, if you look here at the explanation, the information provided is inadequate or does not address all elements of the criterion standard. That would be for a 1. So a couple things we wanted to cover here to make sure that the scale is being interpreted and used in the same way across all committees. First is to remind you what I said earlier. So we encourage you guys to use the full range of the rating scale to assess proposals, both in your preliminary assessment and during the expert committee deliberations. The second thing is that all the ratings you provide should be strongly supported by information in the proposal. So it should be, because of this in the proposal, I think it should get a rating of X. We are not necessarily looking for a global feeling. We're really looking for supported comments, because we need those supported comments for the report. So it really needs to be based on information found in the proposal. Can't be based on your understanding of someone's history or anything like that. It really has to be information on the proposal. So as I mentioned here, a 4 represents that the proposal clearly meets the criterion standard and addresses all the instructions and sub-criteria for that criterion. So we'll get into what I mean by sub-criteria in a little bit, and anybody who's read the call for the reviewer guidelines might already be familiar. But essentially, we have our 5 assessment criteria, and each assessment criteria has some sub-bullets associated to them. For a proposal to receive a rating of 4, has to satisfy all those sub-elements. Otherwise, you're automatically looking at a 3 because you've missed a part of the criteria. However, on the other hand, if a proposal clearly meets the criterion standard, therefore, gets a 4, everything is good, addresses all the instructions for that criterion, and also exhibits some qualities or strengths that exceed what is required, and that's when we're looking at a 4+. So 4+ really means I've met the basic bar for absolutely everything, and there's something that we find exceptional as well in there. So just that's how we're hoping the rating scale will be used. So I wanted to make sure everybody was on the same scale there, or on the same page there in terms of how we're using it. As a reminder, we're really assessing proposals on their own merit. We're not ranking them. You don't need to say, oh, well, this one was a 4, so this one has to be a 3 because I think this one's a little stronger. They can both be 4s, and that's okay. We really put them in related groups because it allows for an easier calibration and benchmarking of a broader context. So I mentioned the minimum threshold here earlier when we were looking at the timeline. So proposals that don't meet what we consider our minimum threshold will not move on to the next level of review. What that essentially means is if a proposal receives a score of 1 or 2 on any given assessment criteria, it will not move forward to the next level of review. If a proposal, so a single one, so just one of either 1 or 2, and if I can show you the rating scale, that means partially satisfied, so major weaknesses or really didn't give us enough information to even assess it, or 3, well, those are minor weaknesses. But if minor weaknesses appear 3 or more times, so if 3 of the 5 assessment criteria or more have that rating scale, that rating of 3 or minor weaknesses, then you're looking at another proposal that will not move forward to the MAC. So this is really to hopefully reduce the burden on the next level of reviews and make sure that we're really only funding the best possible projects. Just gonna go through my notes here. So I want to specify here that we're not sharing this information to dissuade you from using the full range. We want you to use that bottom end of the scale if it's appropriate. We're really making sure that everybody's using this information the same way. We don't want you to artificially inflate scores so that a proposal doesn't get cut or anything like that. As a reminder, we're oversubscribed by about 3 times. So some proposals at every step of the review process should be dropping off to hope so that every level of review we get better and better and better. So we really want to help eliminate proposals at this stage that really don't meet that bar of excellence, or not that bar of excellence, that minimum threshold. So really, you are the experts that understand the nuances of the research, and that might not be as necessarily well grasped at the next level of review because they're multidisciplinary. So it's important that if there are significant weaknesses that should be illustrated in your score and your rating, that should be done. So even if it results in a proposal not moving forward to the next level of review. Now, moving on to our stream. So this is something new that we've done here for this competition. Oh, there you go. We have 3 different streams you can apply to. Our hope is that by adding these streams, it allows us to gently tailor the assessment criteria for each stream so that they become more relevant to the type of proposals that we receive. So as we mentioned, we are, discipline agnostic in the sense that we allow proposals that come in from any kind of discipline. But that means we have to be very careful with how we write our criteria because they have to be generalized enough for that. So here we've tried to separate these 3 categories, these 3 streams, so that we could tailor our assessment criteria just a little bit so that they're as relevant as possible. So you'll notice that the assessment criteria for all streams are very similar. The sub-criteria is what have been tailored a little bit more to better fit the types of proposals in those streams. We'll go through the criteria later. They're also in the guidelines if you want to see them. I see your hand up, Derek. We'll take questions at the end just for expediency, but if you want the question answered right away, please feel free to put it in the FAQ. So to perhaps preemptively answer some of the questions that might come, oftentimes when we present this, people ask, is there a predetermined distribution of funding among those streams? There is not. So the 425 million is what we have for the competition as a whole, and that applies for the 3 streams as a group. So we will we'll see what happens. It's our first time, so we'll see if there's a weird distribution that happens with the funding, but as of right now, there's no predetermined amount of funding for any given stream. So our 3 streams are stream 1, which is basically our open stream. So any proposals from all disciplines can go there. We have our stream 2, which is what we call our SSHA stream, which is proposals that have their primary fields of research in the sciences, humanities, and arts. And then we have our 3rd stream, which are streams that are geared towards core facilities. So people who want to upgrade or build new core facilities. In here, the important caveat is that 100% of the requested infrastructure has to be going in a core facility. For what you guys might be curious about for your committee meetings, to the best of our abilities, we've tried to limit the amount of crossing of streams within a given committee. However, there are situations where topics are so closely aligned that it just makes sense to have them together, even though if they're in different streams. So you might be in a committee that has proposals from stream 1 and stream 3, for example, and that's okay. We'll just have to be very careful during the committee deliberations to keep in mind the slight variety in the assessment criteria when we're discussing them. Yeah, so just to give you a heads up that you might have proposals from different streams despite our attempts to, oh, where did that go? My apologies, I was playing with my mouse. I think that's it for that. So now we can move on to what is probably some of the most relevant information for you guys, which is the assessment criteria. So what are the assessment criteria? So here, my goal, I'll go over them quickly. My goal is not to hash them out into too much detail. The goal here is really to show you what we mean by the sub-elements and some of the distinctions that appear between the streams. Because I assume that you won't be, recalling verbatim what I've said today. We assume you'll be referring back to the guidelines to read them as you're assessing. So really, this is just to give you a bit of an overview and to consult further as necessary. So I mentioned earlier a distinction between our assessment criteria and our competition objectives. So as an expert committee member, you'll be using the assessment criteria. The 5 of them are listed here on the left, on the white side there. Each assessment criteria can, however, be mapped to one of the competition objectives we discussed earlier. And if you recall, the competition objectives is what the multidisciplinary assessment committee will be using. So here at the expert committee stage, the goal is to identify the strengths and weaknesses for each proposal for each of these 5 assessment criteria. So we'll go through these criteria one by one. So we have our first criteria, which is research or technology development. So the standard here is this proposal or is this research conducting or enabling innovative, feasible, and internationally competitive research? So the sub elements to that, so that's your kind of criterion standard that we like to call. This is what we want for that criterion. What that means in terms of sub elements that we want the applicants to have discussed and the reviewers to assess is this information here. So each proposal that's submitted to any of the streams is expected to sufficiently describe how what are the innovative aspects within the national and international context, what considerations, if any, of EDI, have they taken of EDI in their research design. So here on that last one, it's important to say, while the relevance of EDI in research design can vary across fields, we do expect that all applicants to incorporate these principles into their proposals where applicable. And if it's not applicable for whatever reason, it's very important that they justify why. So they can't just not discuss it in their proposal if they think it's not relevant, because it is a sub-criteria you have to assess. So if they don't discuss it, is it because it's not relevant or is it because they didn't put it in? So we have instructed applicants that if something does not apply to them, it is still important for them to explain why and how it does not apply to them. There are some unique considerations for the different streams. So for stream 1 and 2, here we're asking them to detail what their research or technology development program is, provide us the details of what you're planning on doing, what's the approach, what's the methodology, what are any key challenges they may overcome. And that's specific because these proposals in stream 1 and stream 3 should be proposing or illustrating, defining a specific research or technology development program. For stream 3, whenever it's a core, a core will likely support multiple research programs instead of a specific programs with specific activities. So we usually ask them to provide a high-level description of the types of programs they might support, with maybe 1 or 2 examples that are a little bit more specific, a little bit more detailed and fleshed out, but probably not nearly as much as anything you'll see in stream 1 and stream 2. So we're basically just looking for a representative sample of what the projects and the users might be of that requested infrastructure for the core. So that's your first assessment criteria. Since we have taken a new approach to kind of EDI considerations in this competition, and we've decided to provide a little bit more guidance to the applicants and reviewers with what it means to consider EDI in research and planning or things like that. So some examples include ensuring that your research design accounts for biases, which could just mean having gendered samples instead of just using male samples. That's one example. You could include Indigenous members and communities in the planning and design of your research if it's relevant to those communities. So those are just some examples. On the slide here, I've just taken a screenshot of what we have in our guidelines. I just wanted to show you that in our guidelines, we have provided some additional examples to give some context and some help. So feel free to peruse that at your leisure, should it be helpful when you're assessing. So the next assessment criteria here we're looking at is the team criterion. So in short, here we're saying, does the team have all the experience and expertise needed to conduct or enable the proposed activities, and will do so in an inclusive and equitable working environment? So in short, here we're asking, does the team put in place in this proposal have the relevant expertise and experience to do the work they're suggesting? And is this supported by their background and their experience? And secondly, have they taken appropriate actions to allow everyone to fully participate within and take advantage of the proposed activities? The core of what we're asking here. Two things that are important to highlight here is when you're assessing the team members' background and expertise, we want you to consider outputs outside of traditional metrics. So that is to say, not to focus solely on article level metrics like H-index or citations. Not that those should be completely ignored, but they shouldn't be considered in isolation as what we call a surrogate of quality when assessing this criterion. We are hoping to look for achievements and experiences that are assessed through a wide range of possible outputs, which could, of course, include articles and citations, but also things like the development of intellectual property, community engagement activities, the development of new technologies, policy, et cetera, et cetera. The second thing we want to highlight here in the team criterion is when proposals describe their evidence-based activities to enable the full and equitable participation, so their EDI activities in short, We expect that the applicants provide details on the systemic barriers faced and the actions they are specifically taking to help eliminate or mitigate these barriers. So here, what I'm really trying to get at is we want them to talk about the actions they as a team are taking. It's not sufficient to say, oh, well, our institutional policies say this, and we will follow our institutional policies and guidelines. That can be a part of it if it's relevant, but it should hopefully go a little bit beyond that. We're curious about what they're doing as a team, as a group of researchers. So here, I'm just showing you a little bit like I did before, these screenshots from our guidelines for different examples of, words are different academic achievements you can consider outside of just articles and metrics. And we've also got examples of concrete practices you can put into place for mitigating certain barriers that can be faced. So these can include things like equitable and inclusive practices in hiring, removal of gendered language, mentorship of early career researchers, or including early career researchers in advisory positions, things like that. Those are just some examples. We don't need to necessarily go through every single one. These are just, again, more context provided to help you understand what we mean when we say actions taken to overcome those systemic barriers. All right, now moving on to our third criterion, infrastructure. So here in this section, we're basically asking the requested infrastructure, is it necessary and appropriate to conduct the proposed activities? Pretty straightforward. We're asking that every proposal describe what infrastructure they're requesting and why is it needed. So justify that need. Pretty straightforward. For stream 1 and 2, we're specifically asking the applicants to provide some information about how this infrastructure complements what's already available, either at their own institution or that could be reasonably accessible to them, for example, at a partner institution or collaborating institution, things like that. Would this infrastructure cause redundancy, duplication? If it does, is it necessary? So sometimes one of the common arguments that's made is we do have the same infrastructure at our institution, but it's being fully utilized and there's no room for us to kind of come in and do our own work. So it could be all those kinds of things, but we're curious to avoid duplication and redundancy if it's not necessary. And would this maybe even give the institution additional capacity or cutting edge capacity that they didn't have before? So that could be an example of something that's completely novel and complementary to what they're currently doing. For the stream 3, we ask that proposals include how the infrastructure fits within the mission of the core facility. So here we're a little bit more specific to what is the goal of the core facility and does it fit into that, as well as the role of any personnel for whom funding might be requested. So this last element here is key because a unique change that we've brought to the stream 3 is the eligibility of some of the personnel in operating and maintaining this infrastructure. So we've kind of broadened that ability, that funding they can request. So if they're asking for those kind of individuals as part of their funding request, it's important that they justify why and how they're needed. Sustainability. So we're moving on to our fourth criteria now. So here we've talked about what are they doing, who is doing it, their team, what they need to do with their infrastructure. Now we're talking about sustainability. So how are they going to manage and optimally use this infrastructure? So in short, what we want to know is what are the applicants' plans to maintain the infrastructure, both from a financial perspective and an operational perspective. So how will it be used? How will it be maintained? How will user access be controlled? We're also very interested to know how the applicants plan to manage the use and access of the infrastructure, not only to optimize its usefulness, but also to ensure equitable access to the infrastructure. So who gets to use it? Who gets to decide who gets to use it and how? Are there, sometimes we'll see, for example, some reduced cost fees for early career researchers or engagement with communities that might not normally have access to this kind of infrastructure, but that would be helpful for them to have access to. So it could be a variety of things, but that's what we mean by sustainability. And finally, another important criteria is we want to know how any outputs, if relevant, will be securely and ethically managed. So if you're creating a lot of data and that data gets accessed, how is it secured? How do you control who has access? How do you anonymize it if it's relevant? All those types of things. So that's what we mean by sustainability and kind of long-term use of the infrastructure. And then next, we're looking at the benefits. So here, where the team and its partners have a well-defined plan to transfer research or technology development results and mobilize knowledge. The results are likely to lead to benefits for Canadians. So in short here, what we're looking to know is, are there anticipated benefits for Canadians, and what mechanisms are in place to make sure those benefits actually materialize? So if you have great research, but no way, no venue of getting that information out, whether that's, bringing it to market, if that's what you're doing or anything like that, that can really hinder the impact those benefits can have. So, and if those proposed activities are expected to benefit very specific communities, have those communities been considered, involved in the planned transfer of those research outputs? So kind of to get buy-in from those communities, for example. And as a reminder here, when we talk about benefits, a little bit like when we were talking about the team and experience and outputs, it's important to consider a wide variety of what can be considered benefits. Benefits can include, but are not limited to, things like new diagnostic tools, pollution reduction, improved decision-making and policy, or the creation of new jobs and products. So there's a wide variety, and we encourage you to consider a wide variety in your assessment. So in addition to the specific contributions that can stem from these activities, we also ask that applicants highlight how the proposed activities will contribute to the training of highly qualified personnel. So meaning, what will these individuals learn, how many are expected to be trained as part of this program, and what are their potential future contributions to the field in general? And of course, how will equity and diversity be taken into consideration as part of these mentorship and training activities? So those are all a variety of things that we're looking for in the benefits section. So what is the outputs? Who's going to be learning what? And here's the, as I mentioned, we want to consider a wide range of possible research benefits, and we've included a few examples in our call that I am again highlighting here, just so that you're aware that it's a resource available to you as an example. So we've gone through the assessment criteria, and I've mentioned a few times that I want to try and hopefully through this briefing kind of standardize our approach to what we mean by the rating scale and how it's applied. So what I'm hoping to do now is go through a few examples of situations that could be helpful that could hopefully help you understand how we're hoping to apply the rating scale to these assessment criteria. So hopefully this will help us all be on the same page about what we're expecting and how we're hoping to apply the rating scale. So if we look at our first assessment criteria, which is research and technology, if we have a situation where we have a proposal that contains 4 research themes, and 3 of these 4 research themes are great, they're well described, they're scientifically sound, they're great. But the 4th one is not as well described, perhaps even insufficiently scientifically substantiated. So there's not enough information to really say if it's good, if it's bad. There's not enough references to say this, stands up scientifically speaking. So if you look at the relevant sub-criteria, that this could perhaps not be fulfilling all the way. So maybe they're not providing enough information on the detail of their program. Perhaps they're not providing enough information on the methodology or the mitigation of any challenges they might be expect. And they might not even be articulating well the innovative aspects that this 4th research team could be bringing. So these are different areas of the first criterion, the sub-elements of the first criterion, that could be a little bit weaker in the situation described. So here, the maximum rating possible for this proposal, and that doesn't mean it couldn't be lower, but the maximum rating would be a 3, because as soon as one of these sub-elements of a criteria is not met, is not satisfactory, the maximum rating would be 3. So again, I wanted to show some examples of that so that we're all on the same page. So we found in the past that that's what reviewers had a bit of a harder time with. So it'd be easy to just kind of forget a weakness on one of the sub-criteria and say, well, the other ones are good, so let's give it a 4. If we do the same thing and we look a little bit at our team criterion, so if you have a proposal that's supported by a really well internationally renowned team, they have a strong history of research excellence, and collectively they have all the experience necessary to actually conduct the research. But a key element of their proposal is to deliver a product to market. And they have no support in their institution, at least not that they mention. Again, we can only assess what they've included in their proposal. So if they don't mention any kind of support or any kind of team member with that experience, that expertise, that could be considered a significant weakness. If we look at the relevant sub-criteria, they have the expertise needed to conduct the proposed activities. Well, in this case, they would be missing a certain expertise to kind of materialize their work. So similarly, because they would be missing some expertise, there would be a sub-criteria that wouldn't be fulfilled, and therefore the maximum rating would have to be a 3. Again, it could be lower, but it would have to be a maximum of 3. If we're looking at the third assessment criteria, so here, if we have a proposal that's describing a sound research project, they're requesting all the necessary equipment to conduct their activities, but in the budget, they also seem to request some additional items that are either not relevant or not necessary, or even appear redundant, and they didn't justify the need for that duplication. So then you're looking at a project that maybe hasn't sufficiently justified the need for the infrastructure, or they haven't sufficiently justified how it complements what's currently existing at the institution or their partner institutions. So similarly here again, the maximum rating would have to be a 3. And that is the case even if the idea would be to fund this proposal without the superfluous infrastructure. So that additional infrastructure that's not necessary. We're asking reviewers not to say, okay, well, without that, it's a 4, so we'll just give it a 4 and say that we shouldn't fund this part. We're looking at the proposal as a whole, the content, and if an element was subpar, it should be reflected in the score. Now, if we look at sustainability, for example, so here we have a proposal with a strong plan for management, for oversight. They've got a plan to optimize the use of the infrastructure, how they're going to facilitate access to all types of different groups. They plan to securely collect and distribute their data, and they've got great financial support from their institution. And on top of all of that, the team plans to become financially independent through, activities with their current industry partners. They've invested in equipment that allows remote access to their infrastructure from around the globe, which kind of maximizes their impact and increases their revenue pool. They've got all these amazing things going. So here, I wanted to give an example of the absolute opposite of what we've been talking about. Here would be an example of a 4+. So not only have they met that minimum bar of having answered all of the necessary sub-criteria and satisfactorily so, they've got a good financial plan, they've got a good oversight plan, they've got a plan to optimize the use, but they've gone above and beyond what could perhaps be normally expected. And that's justified in the fact that they have taken pains to grow their revenue pool by getting that remote access. They have existing industry partner relationships that they're nurturing and that are growing, things like that. So those are things that are above and beyond kind of what you could expect. And that's when we can afford to, or justify, I shouldn't say afford, justify to give a rating of a 4+, because they've met all the minimum bars and then they've gone above and beyond on certain elements. And finally, if we're looking at our last assessment criteria, our benefits. So here, if you have a proposal that's really great, the team's research activities plan to train hundreds of HQP over the next 5 years. But unfortunately, there's no details in the proposal regarding how the team plans to make sure that there's equitable access to their training programs, to be part of the research, things like that. So here, there's an omission. That doesn't mean they're not doing it necessarily, but as I mentioned, we can only assess what's in the proposal. And as you may recall, one of these sub-elements for benefits was how is the diversity and equity being integrated into the training and mentorship programs of those who participate in these activities. Well, clearly here we don't have the information to assess, so there's a weakness, so the maximum rating would be 3. So I want to really emphasize that omission is a reason to reduce the scoring, if you will. If they don't talk about it, you can't assess it, and if you can't assess it, it obviously doesn't meet the minimum bar just automatically so, because you don't have the information. So hopefully that was helpful in illustrating how we intend to use our rating scale and our assessment criteria. And now I'm going to go into the different parts of a proposal. Very quick highlight just to show you kind of what you can expect to get, the different sections, and the kind of information you can get from those sections. So the first page or two of your proposal will just be basic project information. It'll be automatically filled out from CAMS based on what they put in. So you'll have project title, you'll have, the amount they're requesting, you'll have their key research words. It won't be the core of what you're assessing. It'll all just be the generic details about the proposal, the application team. On the second page, you'll also find a layman's summary of the request. So just a little paragraph. These two sections are probably fairly minimal use in your review process, most likely. Next, you'll have a 3 to 4 page summary of the proposed activity. So that should be a full summary of the proposal, but just very condensed. It should, in theory, talk about all the 5 assessment criteria, but of course, the applicants are free to write the summary how they want. So the amount of information they provide might vary. I suspect this section would be minimally useful to your assessment because it condenses the information too much, but it might be a great way to refresh yourself right before the meeting in terms of what the content of the proposal was about if you read it a little too far in advance of the meeting. The next section you'll have is just a 1-pager summarizing the team members. So it'll basically just be a list of up to 10 people, their names, their affiliation, should give you a summary of who they are. We do have the full CV appended at the end, which I'll get to after. And then the core of what you'll be assessing. So this will be an attachment provided by the applicants. It'll be about 25 to 30 pages based on the total project cost. So bigger projects are allowed to have a couple extra pages to justify everything. And this is really the heart of what you'll be reviewing. We have advised applicants to address each criterion in the order that they appear. So the 5 criterions that we saw, that's the order we told the applicants to submit. So in theory, every proposal should follow that flow of research, team, requested infrastructure, sustainability, and benefits. But they are allowed to present that information in the way they wish. So there might be some variability in how it's presented, how much space they allocate to every criteria. That's really left to their own devices. So if they've done their job well, it will flow in that order, but the amount of information and on exactly what page will vary from proposal to proposal. So those are the different sections you'll see. Some other sections you'll see. So a summary of the financial resources for operation and maintenance. So after you have that kind of attachment with the assessment criteria, that 30-page attachment, you'll have tables, financial tables afterwards. And the first financial table you'll see is one summarizing the resources for the operation and maintenance. So it'll summarize both the costs, that first little table, and the funding sources. So in theory, this should be discussed in the sustainability section of the assessment criterion, but it also summarized here. So it should summarize what are the expected costs, how much do we expect the maintenance of this infrastructure to cost, and how are we planning on covering those costs? Where's the money coming from, how much, things like that. So it should be very reflective of the sustainability section of the proposal. These tables capture the first 5 years. If the requested infrastructure will have a useful life beyond those 5 years, we do recommend that they talk about that in the actual proposal, so the sustainability element of the proposal, but it won't necessarily be reflected in these tables here as they're limited to 5 years. I wanted to bring up here again a reminder that the institutions receive that automatic infrastructure operating fund allocation, that IOF, that 30%, and they will often put that here. So you'll see in the funding sources part, there's institutional contributions, and they'll often put that here. So if you see an amount in there that seems to be equivalent to 30% of the CFI requested money, that is most likely what that represents, that IOF that would come with the project. And after that, perhaps a little bit more relevant will be the table summarizing the cost of individual items. So every item that they're talking about in their infrastructure section that they're justifying that they say they need should appear here in the cost of individual items table. Applicants are allowed to group items by theme. So sometimes you'll see like a microscopy suite and they'll have multiple items. So there might just be a line that says microscopy suite. And then for more information about what specific items are included in that microscopy suite, that should be detailed in the infrastructure budget section of the proposal. And then finally, if your proposal is requesting any kind of significant construction or renovation, after that you should have an attachment provided by the applicants that sort of justify and break down the cost of that renovation. So what are the different costs allocated? What are they going to? And a floor plan that kind of describes the work, where the infrastructure will be going. Here again, these parts are uploaded by the applicants and they're not necessarily always uniform. Don't worry, we don't expect you to be experts in renovation activities. We just basically a perusal to make sure that nothing seems outrageous or out of place or unnecessary. We have technically already vetted all the eligibility, so everything should be eligible. That shouldn't be a problem. It's more to let us know if anything seems absolutely wrong based on your expertise. And then the final section of the proposal will be the CV. So each team member, so up to 10, will have their CV appended at the end of the proposal. Now, the applicants should describe in their 30-page attachment in the team section the relevant experience and expertise of each team member. But if you want to go get more information, if you want to validate some information, you can go to the CVs. As a bit of a heads up, they are pretty long, so it might not be the first place I'd start. I think I'd start with the team section and then go peruse those as necessary, but they can be looked at and it can provide some additional information if ever you're unsure or just want some extra information. And here is a bit of a summary of everything I just said. So you on the left, you have each of the assessment criteria, and on the right, you have the different areas of the proposal that might be relevant to look at when assessing the proposal criteria. A bit of a spoiler, as you might not be surprised to hear at this point, the majority of the information you're going to need and want to look at or spend the most of your time on is that 30-page attachment of the assessment criteria. And that's where you'll notice assessment criteria section, and every one of those, that's where the core of what you're looking at will be. I also wanted to take the time to note one additional thing about the proposals as you read and assess them. So the applicants are allowed to include hyperlinks as they wish. But applicants have also been instructed that proposals should contain all of the necessary information required to assess them. So you as a reviewer are not required to follow those hyperlinks. If you want to, if you're curious, if you're interested, you're allowed. We told them they're allowed to put hyperlinks, so you can. Some of them will use them to kind of summarize references. Anyway, they're allowed to put them in, but as a reviewer, your only job is to assess the content of the submitted application. So you are by no means obligated to follow those hyperlinks. So just as a heads up, in case you see those hyperlinks, please do not feel obligated to add that to your reading list and material. And then finally, we're getting to your role on the expert committee. So we've talked a little bit about this throughout the presentation, but hopefully here we'll break it down into very clear steps and processes. So hopefully a lot of you have activated your CAMS account by now. If you have not, we recommend that you do so as quickly as possible, just in case you encounter any kind of technical difficulty. That way we can help you out. It's a lot easier to do than the weekend right before your committee meeting. Secondly, we recommend that everybody complete the bias and peer review training model. This is just to hopefully help you be aware of any biases you might have while you're reviewing and hopefully help to overcome those. The third thing will be to read relevant documentation. So a lot of the documentation we're actually going to have covered, at least at a high level here today, but the guidelines will cover everything we've talked about today and in a little bit more detail. So the guidelines are a very excellent resource for you. There's the quick reference guide. The quick reference guide is really just a summary of the assessment criteria. It has no other information. It's just really when you're assessing, if you just want the assessment criteria in a very small, nice little PDF, we have the quick reference guide for you. We have the preliminary report template, so you can enter your ratings and scores directly in CAMS, but if for whatever reason that doesn't work for you, if you enter technical challenges, or if you prefer, we do have a report template that you can use. It's just a Word document that kind of summarizes the assessment criteria, and you can just put your score or comments directly in those. If you use the report template, you'll have to send it to us so that we have it. If you do it directly in CAMS, then we can access those ratings and scores automatically. And then, of course, you'll have your meeting agenda. Your meeting agenda will indicate the times, the reviewers, as well as the primary reviewers. So if you haven't gotten that information in any other way, if you're a primary reviewer, it will be in the agenda. So every proposal will have kind of a primary reviewer. The only distinction with a primary reviewer will be that your role is to briefly summarize the proposal content at the beginning of the meeting, which I'll get to, I think, in a slide or two. So after you've read all that relevant documentation, or at least attended this expert committee briefing, the next job will be to read all of the proposals and assess those that you're assigned. So we normally try to assign about 3 to 4 proposals per individual, and we try to have a minimum of 3 reviewers per proposal. So depending on how many proposals you have in a committee, you may not be assigned as a reviewer to all of them. So if you have more than 3 proposals in a committee and we're assigning, everybody 3 proposals, there might be one you're not assigned to read or more. Sorry, not assigned to review. I should be very specific. Not assigned to review. We do, however, recommend, if possible, that you read all of the proposals in your committee so that you are familiar with them and can kind of contribute and participate in the discussions if you have anything to add. Of course, you will most likely spend more time on the ones you are, reviewing than rather just a reader. But we want to let you know that whenever possible, we do recommend that you read all of the proposals within a given committee. Hopefully this will help kind of benchmark and get a context, get some better information about the context of the types of proposals that are being submitted. And then finally, we ask that you submit your preliminary assessment of the assigned proposal. So the final consensus score and the final decision on what are the strengths and weaknesses for each criterion will happen at your committee meeting during the deliberations. You guys will discuss, you'll come to an agreement, but to help us prepare for those meetings, so to help us, and what we mean by prepare is to help us identify areas, maybe that there'll be some contention. So if someone rated something really high and someone else rated something really low, then we know that there might be an area of contention that will require a little bit more discussion. If, for example, in the preliminary comments, we noticed that nobody discussed any of the sub-elements on a given criteria, then we want to be prepared for that to bring it up during the meetings. So for all those reasons, we ask, if possible, to submit a preliminary assessment of your assigned proposals 1 week prior to the meeting. So whatever your meeting date is, subtract a week, and that's when we hope to get your preliminary scores so that we can prepare for the meetings and be efficient in running it. And that's it. And as a reminder here, you can submit those preliminary ratings either in CAMS directly or via the preliminary report template that I mentioned. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with CAMS, you might be wondering, and I keep saying CAMS, I guess I should specify what CAMS is. CAMS is our portal through which we do everything. We receive our proposals, we do our review process through there, we share the results through CAMS. So all of that is our portal where everything happens and lives. So in this portal, you would log in most likely through the email, your institutional email. Then you access your reviewer dashboard, and then you'll select the committee in question. Once you've selected your committee in question, you can download all of the material I just discussed. So everything from the agenda to the report template to the guidelines to the quick reference guides, as well as all the proposals. So you'll have this little PDF icon over here. You can download individual proposals, or you can just select all of them and click big download button. So that's where you would get access to your review material once you've logged into your reviewer dashboard. Once you've done your assessment, or as you're doing your assessment, you can go to your review tab, and here you'll have all the projects that are in your committee, and you can select them. And if you select them, it'll pop up your ability to submit the comments and scores. So here, the comments column all the way on the right here, you click the view edit to view or edit your comments. So to add your comments or look at the comments you've already put in. You then select the rating. Again, this rating should be substantiated by your comments. And then you'll do that for each of the criteria. Then you'll save and you'll submit, and you'll rinse and repeat for all the proposals that are assigned to you. So you'll go back to your review tab, select the next proposal, submit your assessment, and so on and so forth. There, as I mentioned a couple times now, there is the alternative of the preliminary report template that you should be able to download through this portal, but you'll just have to send to us via email. And by us, I mean whoever your committee lead is. So whoever you've been emailing back and forth with organizing your committee, send it to them via email. And I showed you what it looks like a little bit when you submit your ratings and CAMS. This is just a quick screenshot of the preliminary report template. Basically, it'll have each criteria, the sub-criteria, the strengths and weaknesses, and kind of your score that you would like to provide for it. So it's a little visual of what you can expect. And that's how you can submit your assessment criteria, as well as access your review material. And then finally, we'll go on to the meeting logistics. So what can you expect as part of a meeting? So during a meeting, each proposal will be discussed in turn, allowing approximately 1 hour for proposal, which means about 10-ish minutes per criteria. And the discussion should, in theory, go a little bit like this. So you'll have a chair who will animate the discussion, and they'll call on the lead reviewer. The lead reviewer will give a brief summary of the proposal, and then they'll talk about its strengths, its weaknesses, based on the criterion standard. And then after that lead reviewer gives that summary, both of the proposal and of their assessment, the additional reviewers will in turn share their own assessment of the proposal. Again, everything should be substantiated based on the content of the proposal and the assessment criteria and their sub-elements. For expediency, oftentimes we'll ask if they, you'll have chairs or anybody leading the conversation who will say, do you have anything different to add? So either you disagree with what they said or you have a different point you want to bring up, to keep everybody's time as much as possible. If you're just agreeing saying the same thing, it's okay to just say that as well, especially if you've provided that content in your preliminary comments already, then we already have the language we need. And then once the assigned reviewers have discussed, we'll open it up to the committee as a whole to see if they have any additional comments or contributions that they would like to do. And then after that discussion concludes, the committee then comes to an agreement on what the overall assessment of the strengths and the weaknesses are. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll ask the chair, okay, everybody's spoken now. Can you briefly summarize what the strengths and the weaknesses were that came out of that conversation? And then basically, usually when we summarize those strengths and weaknesses, you'll come up with a rating that is substantiated by those strengths and weaknesses. So whatever, based on the comments you have, find a rating that matches those comments. And then that will repeat for the next assessment criteria. So our reports are written assessment criteria at a time. So it's very helpful for us to have the discussion go one assessment criteria at a time so that we can focus on what the strengths and weaknesses were for each criteria and make sure that we've captured all the comments in the right section and have a rating that matches those strengths and weaknesses that were discussed. And finally, some best practices in the peer review. So I've mentioned a lot of these already, but we'll reiterate here. So important to focus on the scientific content and the quality and breadth of the contributions and impact. And when you do that, consider a wide range of achievements, a wide range of possible outcomes and impacts and benefits. It doesn't need to, it doesn't always have to be what we would expect or what is standard. A reminder to use the full rating scale and substantiate your opinions with evidence and examples. So really pull from the proposal. This was good because X, Y, Z. Pull from the proposal. If you want in your comments to copy paste, a sentence or two from proposal, that's absolutely okay. And then finally, for reaching a consensus, important to work towards a fair rating based on your panel. I would argue that the closest thing to the fairest thing you can do is really make sure your rating matches well with the comments you've pulled and make sure your comments match well, are very substantiated with what's in the proposal. So I'm repeating a lot, but it's a key message here we want to get across. And then to pay attention to the comments and scores of other reviewers in your panel. So this really is a discussion. We're interested in getting different points of view. And on that, perhaps I'll mention sometimes we have reviewers who feel bad about switching their preliminary score, so they kind of want to stick to their guns and their original opinion. And I'd like to emphasize here that you by no means are in a situation where you need to justify your preliminary scores or try and retain them. They're really there to help us prepare for the meetings, but beyond helping us prepare for the meetings, they have no bearing on what has to be the outcome. So just because you thought it was a 4+ and someone brought up a weakness you didn't consider, doesn't mean you have to stick to your guns there. It's okay to change. You're by no means obligated to kind of stick to your guns in that way. So just wanted to bring that up since it is sometimes something that people tend to go back to their preliminary ratings and it's really not necessary. We really want to focus on the outcomes of the discussion at the meeting. And the reason I say that with the previous slide is important in that respect to consider what the other reviewers are saying and what the rest of your panel is saying. So after we've had those deliberations, we've had those discussions, there's going to be an expert committee report that comes out. One report per proposal. It'll include both the rating as well as a summary of the strengths and weaknesses. We'll usually ask the committee chair, if there's a chair. If there's no chair, then it'll just be the committee members. But we usually ask the committee chair to review this report and make sure it's accurate, make sure it's complete, make sure we haven't missed anything. In case anybody's worried, the CFI does draft this report. So that might be why you'll hear us chime in a few times during the meetings and ask clarifying questions. It's because we'll be writing these reports, so we want to make sure that we have accurate information. Sometimes it's not our field of expertise, so we just want to ask some clarifying information, especially if there are very technical discussions going on. But we will draft them and then we'll send it along to at least the chair or the committees to validate that the information is accurate. And then that report will be the basis of what informs the next level of review. So the MAC committees will rely very heavily on your expertise to make their assessment, since they will not necessarily be content experts, whereas you are. They will also be, these reports will also be provided to the applicant institutions at the end of the competition. So when the results are released, in case that makes anybody nervous, we want to reassure you, though we put the name of the expert committee members at the end of the report, no individual comment or anything that will be attributed to any individual member. It's always, the committee as a whole thought this. So just so that you are all aware of that. And then conflicts of interest and confidentiality. So here's our little, kind of disclosure at the end, or maybe not disclosure, what's the terms of reference or whatever you want to call them at the end here. Conflicts of interest. So if you encounter anything as you're reading the proposals that could be considered a conflict of interest, we ask that you please let us know as quickly as possible. We've included what we consider a conflict of interest here, and we have a much longer policy that I think we've linked in a variety of emails in our communications with you. But in short, if you're a friend with one of the applicants or a close relationship, if you're in a position to gain or lose financially from whether a proposal gets funded or not, if you've had any long-standing scientific differences, if you're currently affiliated with kind of the same institution as one of the applicants, or if you've had a close professional relationship in the last 6 years. One of the most common ones we'll see is if you've published together, for example, or if you've been a supervisor of one of the applicants. Those would be examples of things that contribute to it, or that would be perceived as a conflict of interest. We ask that you let us know as quickly as possible if you notice any of those, so that we can find a replacement, because in theory, we don't want anybody with a conflict to be reviewing the proposals. So anybody who has a conflict, we have to kind of adjust the committee accordingly. So if you have one, please let us know as quickly as possible. And secondly, confidentiality, of course. So a reminder that that all documentation is confidential, should be kept to yourself, only used for the purposes of reviewing. It should be destroyed after the review process when it's no longer required. And perhaps most importantly, we expect that there's no communication between the reviewers and the applicants. So if the applicants talk to you, if you talk to the applicants, either direction of conversation is seen as a breach of confidentiality, so we expect that not to happen. Usually not a concern during the review. If you ever get an email after the fact, so if they saw your name on a report or something like that and you don't feel comfortable, please feel free, just send that email along to us. They should, we don't expect our reviewers to be discussing with the applicants about the review process. And that brings me to the end of all my spiels. I hope it has been informative and not too long listening to me talk about all of this. So at any point in time, if you have any questions, please feel free to either email our kind of generic inbox there, or to email the committee lead that has been discussing back and forth with you. We should be very responsive. We're very happy to help. We're aware that you guys are doing a lot of work for us, and we're here to support you in any way, shape, or form that we can. So with that, I will say another great big thank you. I will stop sharing my screen. My colleagues will continue to answer the questions in the FAQ, but if anybody would like to answer questions vocally, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll call on you one-on-one, and you can unmute yourselves and go ahead. I believe, Ed, go ahead if you want. Can you unmute yourself? I believe we allowed participants to unmute themselves, but if not, I can unmute you. Doesn't look like you can unmute yourself. Okay, so I'm just going to click allow mic. So you should be able to unmute yourself now.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, listen, thank you so very much, Natalie, for a very clear exposition. I have a few points of clarification I'd like to have. Number one is often in the process of a lengthy review, we're going deeply into every single one. After the committee has had the opportunity to work with each other, we change our scoring ever so slightly from what we would do at the beginning to what we do at the end. So it's not uncommon for me to ask if we can go back to the scores that have been given and see if anybody has changed their minds on the score. Is that going to be okay?
I would say that that's okay as part of the as part of the process. So committee chairs sometimes have different feelings about that. I think nothing in our policy says that that's not possible during the meetings. I would say that after the meeting is concluded, that might become a little bit more challenging.
No, I understand. I
But
understand we want.
yes, but I would say that's absolutely appropriate if you have, especially if you have multiple proposals, you'd be like, okay, now that we've discussed things, I'd like to go back to this one because maybe it wasn't fair, or hey, we noticed these two same things that were rated differently in these proposals. It is absolutely okay as part of the deliberations to go back if it's warranted. The only thing we caution against is to kind of edit the scores unnecessarily, if you will, so you don't no need to go back and review for the sake of re-reviewing, if you will, but it's absolutely something that can be done if we feel it's helpful to make sure we've calibrated our review well.
Right. The second question is, who's going to assign the primary and secondary reviewers?
So the primary and secondary reviewers are assigned by us, so whoever's leading the committee. If the chair has any strong inputs, I'm sure that we would be more than happy to take on their opinions, but we just try and do as much of the work as possible on their behalf. So we will send out an agenda or a kind of a table summarizing the membership or the assignment, sorry, depending on who's doing. Some people prefer sending it in the agenda first, some people prefer sending a table, but that should be provided to you. If not, as soon as the committee membership is complete, usually that'll be shared. It'll be identified by us, but if there's any concerns or questions at any point in time, committee leads are usually very open to discussing and modifying to make people more comfortable, if that answers your question.
Great, thank you.
So we'll move on to Judith. I'll allow the mic.
Oh, hi, this is my first time for a Canadian review. So I thought it was an excellent presentation. I just have a couple quick logistic questions. One is, will we get a copy of the slides? And
Yes.
two, when will we find out about our proposals and when we actually meet? I mean, I just blanked off the week. I don't think we're meeting for a week.
Sure. So as for the slides, yes, absolutely. Recording of this presentation can be shared about, as well as the slides. And honestly, all the information in the slides is also already available in the guidelines. I don't think I've shared anything that is surprising in here. As for when you'll find out, that does vary a little bit from committee to committee. So if you want to know more specifics, I'd recommend you reach out to your committee lead, whoever's leading that committee. The reason I say that is normally we will wait to schedule a committee until we've recruited kind of our whole committee. So sometimes if there's a straggler, like it's difficult to fill in a specific gap, or if we're waiting on people to provide their availability, sometimes there can be some delays in scheduling it. And we'll obviously focus on scheduling the committees that happen a little bit earlier in time. So we're having committees between March and July. So all that to be said, I'm sorry, I don't have a clear answer for you other than maybe reach out to your committee lead. And they can provide more information on kind of the expected date for when something will be nailed down. But if it hasn't already been nailed down, most of ours have been. So I suspect there's probably just some challenges in either completing the committee membership or finding a date that works with everybody.
So maybe I'm missing an email because so the first person who contacted me about serving on the committee is my committee lead.
Yes, correct. Usually, yeah, usually the person who's oh, it looks like not.
Yeah, I'm just going to pop in. Judith, I'm on the call too. I'm your committee lead, and I will follow up with you directly after the meeting to make sure that you're all set up.
Okay. Oh, thanks very much. Oh, hi,
Yeah, no
Natalie.
problem.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Thanks, Nat. Andrew, I don't know if you wanted to try again. Still having any issues? All right. Sorry about that. I will move on to Bettina. I'll allow your mic.
Great. So I noticed there's no scientific officers. So who is actually taking notes on the discussion for the committee?
Yes. So as people, since the CFI staff will be drafting the reports, we'll be responsible for taking notes. Whoever will be validating the reports, so in most cases the chairs, sometimes it'll be sent to the committee as a whole. We encourage, at least sparse notes to be able to validate the information. If we send the report to you a week or two after the committee meeting, hopefully you'll have just enough notes to maybe validate that the information is relevant. Though if you're a committee member, in theory, you should have your own notes already as you're doing your preliminary assessment. So to answer your long-winded answer, short to say, we at the CFI will be taking care of taking the notes and writing the reports formally. And then the rest of the committee at their own level of comfort for if you will have to validate the information.
Okay. So as a chair, I can also take notes and then use those to validate yours when I get it. Okay, perfect. Thank
And
you.
we will usually also share, the chair will receive, I guess I didn't specify here. Usually we will share the preliminary comments and scores with the chair so that they kind of, so in the same way that we want to prepare for the meetings, we also want the chair to be able to prepare for the meetings by knowing expected areas of contention or anything like that. So any
Perfect.
discrepancies
Yeah.
in scores. So that's usually shared with the chair as well.
So
Nat,
like,
did you have something? Oh, sorry,
Is
go
that a
ahead.
week before? That's a week before or when we have that meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
So it is a week before. If people are submitting their comments in a timely manner, sometimes reviewers are busy as life gets, so we don't always receive them all a week before. But the goal and the intent is to submit them a week before. Yeah, that's right.
And hi, Bettina. Nice to meet you. I'm Natalie. I'm your committee lead, and I will be getting in touch with you to set up a meeting. So anybody who's in my committees and is a current chair, expect an email from me coming soon to set up a meeting in advance so we can talk about all these questions. And nice to meet everybody, and thanks so much.
Perfect. Ed, I noticed your hand is still up. I don't know if you still had another question that I didn't get to addressing before. No, okay, perfect. Same, I'll allow yours up next. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yeah, you might have mentioned this. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry. You might have mentioned this, but I'm a little confused. I see three titles. I hear you say chair, committee lead, lead reviewer.
Yes.
So that's a lot of names. I'm not really sure about who's doing what at this point, but could you just maybe clarify who these people are and in my group who is yeah, thank you.
That's absolutely fair. So when we refer to a chair, that's usually an external person who will be guiding the discussion. So they won't be an assigned reviewer. So it's someone we've recruited and asked to join this committee, but they won't be assigned to review the proposals per se. They'll have access to them. They'll be expected to read them and be familiar, but their role is really to guide the discussion, help the committee come to a consensus, kind of as that scientific expert to bring everybody together and herd all those cats. That's the chair. The committee lead is the CFI person who's responsible for that committee. So we're doing the report writing, we're doing the recruitment, we're doing facilitating the logistics. So when I say committee lead, that's usually what I refer to is the CFI staff who are organizing, managing that meeting. The chair is who's running that meeting, that external person. And then the reviewers are those who are assigned to assess those proposals. And then you have lead reviewer. The only distinction to the lead reviewer is that they'll be called on first when we're discussing that proposal to give kind of a 1-minute brief summary of that proposal before we move on to discussing the criterion. That's honestly really the biggest distinction. Lead reviewer tends to be the person whose expertise is the most closely aligned to the proposal, but that's not necessarily 100%. All three members could be just as closely aligned to the topic. Yeah, I hope that clears up the different roles.
It does. It does. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
So I will be contacted by somebody who is the committee lead at some point in the next little while.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's me again.
Oh, okay. All right.
Hi.
Thank you.
Perfect. Excellent.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions there? Oh, nope, I see the mic's off. Perfect. Sarah, I'll allow your mic. Go ahead.
And assigned to be lead reviewer or not?
Sorry, I think the first part of your question got cut out. I didn't quite hear it.
How do we know who has been assigned lead reviewer?
Yes. So this should be sent to you by your committee lead, and it will either be in the agenda or in just kind of a table matrix that they'll provide to you. So different committee leads like to share the information in a different way, but you should have it. Sarah Wells, I actually believe you're on my committee, so I can follow up directly with you afterwards if you'd like. If I recall, you're on one of my committees. But yes,
Okay.
it should be in the agenda.
Okay, thanks.
If you're in my committee, I like to share it through the agenda, so it should be in the agenda, and it'll be essentially identified by an asterisk in the agenda, where it'll be the committees. We'll have people assigned to the reviewer in the agenda, and then the first one will have an asterisk identifying the lead reviewer.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. I don't see any other questions, but I am free for the next little bit should any others come up. And I'm sure my colleagues are on the FAQ if there's any other questions there. Yes, I will. Let me just unmute your mic. Oh, you should still be able to unmute, Same. Go ahead.
Sorry, just one more question.
No,
Did you
absolutely.
mention that the names of the reviewers are going to be provided in the final report going to the applicants? So what is the benefit for doing that?
The reason we share it is to provide some credibility to the review, if you will. If we just write this report and we say we've gotten experts on the subject matter, I mean, they would just have to take us at our word about who the experts are, right? So that's one of the reasons we share it, is kind of for that transparency and that credibility. Another reason we can sometimes share it, or at least keep a record of it, it helps us keep a record of it, is proposals, if they've been funded, can ask for changes to the proposal. And sometimes those changes are so significant that we like to reach out to prior reviewers and be like, hey, does this change make sense within the context of what they're asking? Because we're not always subject matter experts. So there's a couple of reasons like that, but I would say the main reason I'm aware of is really that transparency and that credibility to the scientific review of it. Go ahead, Nat.
Yeah, great job, Alex.
Thank
Just
you.
maybe if you want to put up the slide with the Innovation Fund email in case people have other questions afterwards, we can put that back up perhaps, so you can see how to get in touch with us after the meeting.
Absolutely. Well, I think that will have been the end of our presentation then, unless any other last minute questions pop up. So again, I'll say thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this work. It's very much appreciated. We could absolutely not do what we do without you. So much appreciated, and have yourself a good afternoon. Yeah, yes, Russell. I will allow your mic. Go ahead.
I apologize. I was just trying to clap and say thank you for the great presentation, and I hit the raise hand instead of the react button, and I couldn't undo it. I apologize. But thank you.
No
It was an
worries,
excellent
we put you on the
presentation.
spot. Take care. Thank you. Any luck unmuting there? No way. I will move on to Vivian, but if you're able to unmute in the meantime, don't hesitate. So Vivian, I'll allow your mic. Go ahead. Looks like a lot of people are having a hard time unmuting. Okay, I'll go ahead to Alexandra and unmute the mic. Go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Absolutely.
Okay. So
sorry, Alexandra.
I have one question regarding submitting a review. And after submitting, say, a review, say 1 or 2 days after, I thought, oh, I like to slightly modify or something like that. Can we do that? The reason why I'm asking this question is I'm quite involved in European horizons, EU horizons. Once you submit the review, you cannot change. So that's the reason I'm asking this question.
There's a couple ways to take this. We technically have access here on the back end to your reviews, regardless of whether you formally submit them or not. We can kind of still see that. So one way you could technically go about it is by filling out your review and not fully submitting them, so that you could keep going back in and editing. Nat would maybe have to let me know if once you submit, if you can unsubmit, because I don't think you can modify them once they've been submitted, but I don't know if you can.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Unsubmit.
Yeah.
That having been said, oh, go ahead, Nat.
Yeah, so if you submit a review and then you realize, oh no, I have to change something, or I've changed my mind, or I have have another thought, just get in touch with the CFI contact. We can return your review to you and have it, and then you can edit it and then resubmit it. So that's pretty easy to do.
Yes, that's true. I
Okay,
forgot.
thank-
Yes, I forgot we can do the return. That's true. Thanks, Nat. So yeah, there's a couple options there. There's letting us know, we can return it to you. Alternatively, there's always the deliberations. So, if you think of something
Yeah,
the night
yeah, of
before
course.
and you don't have to, stress and get up and necessarily fill it out, it can be something you discuss
Yeah.
at the committee meeting. So yeah, there's a couple opportunities there if there's something you
So
consider after
then
that.
a quick question is, should I send an email to this innovation at the fund at innovation, or should I send an email to this Marianne Suti? Or
Yes,
where I should send?
You can do either. If you have a committee specific question and you send it to the generic innovation fund, chances are it'll just get sent to that committee lead anyway. So I would say it depends on the nature of your question, but let me know if you disagree. That my gut feeling would be just to send it to your committee lead. They are the ones who will be kind of discussing with you more directly. And if they have a question they can't answer, then they'll move it up. But your committee lead, I think, is probably your primary point of contact.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Alexandra, are you able to unmute? Perfect.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, just some practicalities because I just logged into CAMS to check
Okay.
the documents there. And it says that your records show that I have not been assigned to a CFI review.
So what that means is your committee has just not been made active yet, and it might not be made active. There's a couple reasons it might not be made active. If there's as I mentioned, when we received our proposal, we did a bit of an administrative review, and some proposals had some issues with them that we're still resolving with the institution. So that could be a reason why your committee is not active. So that's probably one of the more likely reasons. But if you want to get a timeline on when you can get access to those, I would reach out to your committee lead. They might have a very specific reason for why they're holding off on providing that. Go ahead, Nat.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
just mention, like, we've just finished the administrative process with kind of looking at all the proposals and making sure they have all the pieces that they need. With almost 350 proposals coming to the competition, it's taken a little bit longer than we anticipated, but it is going to be done before the end of the week. So I would say within, the next couple of weeks, you will definitely be hearing from your committee lead if you haven't already, and making sure that, you'll be shown all the review materials and you should find it all on your dashboard. But if it's not there, don't panic unless you have a meeting sort of on March, 13th to 24th. And I hope if anybody does, you've already received that. I think you did. Then it will be there soon.
Okay, thanks for clarification.
Yes, absolutely. Our process is usually to send an email once the review materials are available. So please don't feel the need to go check CAMS every day to see if it's there. We should inform you when it's available so that hopefully that doesn't add too much stress and too much time in your day checking all the time if it's there. Your committee lead should send you an email saying, review material is now available. Thank you again for those that are still on the line. Much appreciated. And I'll see some of you most likely between now and July. I will.
Just a quick question. Would the
Yes,
recording come to all of us?
Yes, the recording will be shared to all of the reviewers. So not just the people who were registered to today's meeting. My understanding is it'll be shared to basically anybody who's agreed to be a reviewer. That way, for those people who couldn't attend or want to reconsult it, they can.
All right, that's good because I came a little late, so I would like to go over the presentation.
Perfect. And if it does make you feel any better, I don't believe I've shared any information that is not already in the reviewer guidelines. So the reviewer guidelines are a very good resource if ever you don't feel like listening to a whole hour-long meeting again.
All right, that's good. Thank you very much.
Of course. Keiko?
Yes, I have one more question.
Yeah.
So you have another information session on April 23.
Correct. Yes.
Correct. During what time? The reason why is a committee, we have a committee meeting on that date. So I thought maybe nice to refresh something if this is in the morning.
I think it's the same time. Nat, I don't know if you can confirm quickly for me.
It's at 1 p.m. Eastern time or
1
1:30
p.m.
Eastern time. It looks like.
Okay. So it doesn't work. Yeah. Okay.
No.
No, it's okay. Thank you very much.
I mean, if you're just looking for a refresher, it should be the exact same content. If you're looking for a refresher, feel free to consult the recording again that will be shared if that's
Okay.
helpful at all.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Of course. Excellent. Oh, and I mentioned feel free to consult the recording, but also your committee lead, I'm sure would be absolutely happy to meet with anybody prior to the meeting should you have any questions or concern.